Hello and welcome back to my channel, and you joined me in London for a history walk, and I'm starting my journey here at St. Katherines dock. Now, it was designed back in 1828 by Sir Thomas Telford. This is just one of many docks that formed the Port of London Authority, and that was in operation all the way up to 1968. And it's absolutely wonderful walking around here. I've walked past quite a few marinas on my travels in recent months. Swansea and Ipswich, just to name two. And they got some fantastic vessels here. But the dock today is quite unrecognisable to how it used to be back in the 1820s, 1830s, just when the dock was newly completed. It's called St. Katherines Dock after the former St. Katherines Hospital, which used to stand just next to the site and has long since been demolished. But I love walking around marinas and docks and ports and looking at some of the vessels here in the moored up at the quayside. Some of them are just beyond impressive. One particular one, I'm just lost for words, just the size of this super yacht. Absolutely incredible. I've had a good look around this marina. It really is impressive, and the array of vessels that are here as well, from Dutch barges and narrowboats up to these quite amazing super yachts. I had a look around Ipswich Marina and Swansea Marina in recent weeks, and but this is the creme de la creme of the boating world, to be moored up here in St. Katherines Dock. Really is, I think I'd have to go to Monaco or somewhere, or Marseille, somewhere in the south of France, to actually find something that's a little more impressive than some of these super yachts. Wow. They've made a few films here in the past, and television shows as well. One that comes to mind is the film, a 1968 film called Attack on the Iron Coast. That was an old Jeff Bridges film, and they showed commandos training in the dock there. I've also filmed episodes of Doctor Who and the Sweeney back in the 70s, and I think an adaptation of Charles Dickens's David Copperfield, starring Richard Attenborough, was filmed here as well. But I can't see them filming here at the moment. Well, I probably could actually, but it'd require a lot more permissions, I suppose, than you did back then. But it's nice to see places in London on films and see how they used to be. But the dock has changed so much since it was built. It's almost unrecognisable, but they still do have one or two cranes and bollards, etc., as a reminder of the working past that this dock had. But yeah, absolutely lovely, it really is. Just ahead of me is the famous Tower Bridge, probably one of the most famous bridges in the whole world. And under the tower is a place called Dead Man's Hollow. This is where any dead bodies that had been found floating in the Thames were brought ashore. But now let's head up to the Tower of London and discover some of the history of this quite incredible building. Well, that's disappointing. I was trying to walk down by the front of the tower, by the river, down the wharf, but it's all blocked off. You can't get down there due to COVID restrictions. I'm beginning to despair with COVID restrictions at the moment. I can see why they do it, but I can't see the point of cordoning off an open area, an outdoor open area because of COVID. Just doesn't make any sense to me, but there we go. We have to respect the rules and regulations that exist due to COVID. So I'm unable to walk past the Traitor's Gate, or perhaps I should say the Water Gate, because it was built in the early 14th century by Edward I to provide extra accommodation. Watergate served another purpose as well, because it allowed goods to go into the tower. It was easier to transport goods by the river, food and provisions and other things, and unload them inside the little jetty there, inside the wharf, inside the Tower of London. But it became known as the Traders' Gate because it's where the tradesmen would go to deliver the goods. But traders gave way to Traitors' Gate because it was also where those who had been condemned arrived at the tower at the end of their final journey. Many of them lost their heads within inside the walls, and others up on Tower Hill. And we're going to head up there shortly and look at some of the executions. But the building itself is absolutely incredible, but not as incredible as the history of the Tower of London. The central keep at the Tower of London, known as the White Tower, began construction in the 1070s by William the Conqueror in order to defend and proclaim his royal power. All the stone used to build the White Tower came from Caen in France and was transported in boats which moored next to the construction site. Throughout its history, this mighty fortress has been used as both a palace and a prison. But the tower also has a richer and more complex history, having been home to a wide variety of institutions, including the Royal Mint, the Royal Armouries, and even a zoo. Over the past 1,000 years, the castle complex has been extended to include 2 curtain walls, numerous other buildings, and several additional towers. Today the Tower of London houses the Crown Jewels, and is London's top tourist attraction, attracting around 3 million visitors a year. They come to marvel at the grandeur of the buildings, to learn about its history, and to hear the stories relating to its famous prisoners and their executions. Many of those prisoners entered the tower by the river, through the now infamous Traitor's Gate. Sir Walter Raleigh spent 13 years as a prisoner at the tower, between the years 1603 and 1616, before being beheaded at Westminster in 1618. Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, became the first Queen of England to be executed at the Tower on the 19th of May 1536, after being found guilty of adultery, incest, and high treason. Catherine Howard was the 5th wife of Henry VIII, and she lost her head on the 13th of February 1542. Just 2 years later, Lady Jane Grey, who had been queen for just 9 days, was beheaded on the 12th of February 1544. these are just a few of the stories you will hear about when you visit the Tower of London. With so much history at the Tower, it's no wonder that the Tower of London is London's top visitor attraction. But just up ahead of me is an old postern, an old entrance gate into what used to be Roman London, or Londinium, as the Romans used to call London. The previous capital was Cumuludunum, which is modern-day Colchester, but following the Boudiccan Revolt of AD 61, the Romans moved their capital to Londinium and built an impressive fortified walled town. That walled town is today known as the City of London, or the Square Mile, and there are still remnants of Roman London if you know where to look. Just up ahead is the church of All Hallows by the Tower, and it dates from the year 675. The church survived the Great Fire of London of 1666, but was destroyed during the Second World War during the bombings, and was rebuilt in 1957, and it's still looking really impressive. Yeah, really impressive. You can still see some of the older brickwork from the original church on the inside. It's quite magnificent the way they've combined modern architecture and kept so much of what used to be there. There's a really interesting little museum in the crypt, but sadly, because of the COVID restrictions, it's actually not open, which is a great shame, because I'd like to have shown you the section of Roman floor that was in there, and also an altar that was brought back from the Holy Lands during the Crusades at the time of Richard I. But there are a few interesting people who have connections to the church. William Penn was baptised there on the 23rd of October 1644. Now he went on to found the state of Pennsylvania in what would eventually become the United States of America. And John Quincy Adams, well, he was married there in 1797, and he went on to be the 6th president of the United States of America. And also George Jeffreys was married there in 1667. You may not recognise the name George Jeffreys, but if I tell you that he's better known as Judge Jeffreys, the hanging judge, then you may know who I'm talking about. He was notorious, and following the failed Monmouth Rebellion of 1685, down at the Assizes in Dorchester, he sentenced no end of people to be hung, drawn and quartered. He had a reputation of sentencing virtually everybody who passed through his assizes to death, and he was married there. So three famous people from history who have a connection to the church of All Hallows by the Tower. However, there's one other figure from history who also has a connection to the tower, and that's Samuel Pepys, because he observed the Great Fire of London from there in 1666. He stood on the top of the tower and looked down as London burnt. Obviously it's not this exact tower because it's been rebuilt, but this is the church that he observed the Great Fire of London. But the church itself was witness to so much history up here on Tower Hill. And that's all the executions that took place up here. And I'll talk about those in a moment, but I'm just going to make my way down towards the Tower of London itself and take a look at the outside of one of the towers and retrace the route taken by the condemned as they walked up towards the scaffold. Behind me is the Bywood Tower and the Middle Tower, two of the main gateways into the Tower of London. And it's through those gateways that those condemned prisoners would have made their last journey. And then coming up here towards the site of the scaffold, in many cases there'd be crowds up here cheering them on, all coming to watch their execution. I don't know what would have gone through their mind as they walked up this road. Probably one of fear, because I would certainly feel very fearful if I was walking up here towards my execution. And fear would certainly play a part in James Scott's walk up here, because he was the first Duke of Monmouth. And on the morning of the 15th of July, 1685, he walked up this road where I'm walking now, to Tower Hill. Up there was his executioner, a man called Jack Ketch, and he had a reputation for botching executions. And so Monmouth would have felt incredibly nervous and apprehensive about the event which was about to unfold. And he had good reason to, because the execution of the Duke of Monmouth would go down in history as the bloodiest ever seen at the Tower of London. And all those executions took place just here. This is the site of the scaffold. This is where over 100 people were put to death. Some cleanly with one stroke of the axe, and others, like the Duke of Monmouth, with 5 strokes of the axe. There's quite a who's who of people who have met their end here. I've got a little list, too much to remember. There's Edward and Thomas Seymour. Well, they were the brothers of Jane Seymour, and she was the 3rd wife of King Henry VIII. And there's George Boleyn. Well, he was the brother of Anne Boleyn, the 2nd wife of Henry VIII. They all lost their heads up here. And there's Lord Guildford Dudley. He lost his head in 1554. He was the husband of Lady Jane Grey, who was famously queen for just 9 days. Throughout history, over 100 people have lost their heads here on Tower Hill, including 2 former Archbishops of Canterbury. They were William Laud on the 10th of January 1645 and Simon Theobald in 1381. By June 1381, the Peasants Revolt was reaching its climactic final stages. The people of England were not happy about the new poll tax, which had been introduced by the then Chancellor Simon Theobald. As well as being made Chancellor in 1380, he was already the Archbishop of Canterbury, having taken up that post 5 years earlier. On the 14th of June 1381, an angry mob reached the Tower of London, determined to get Simon. The tower was designed to keep any attackers out, but on that day they were let in. Simon was at prayer inside St. John's Chapel
inside the White Tower. The angry mob stormed the tower and dragged Simon out onto Tower Hill, where he was beheaded by 8 strokes of the axe. His body was taken to Canterbury for burial, but his head was spiked on London Bridge for all to see. A passer-by recognised him and took it back to Sudbury, where it remains today inside St Gregory's Church.
I hope you've enjoyed this little video, and I apologise that COVID restrictions have meant that I couldn't bring you everything that I'd like to have brought you in this video. But thank you so much for watching, and look forward to seeing you next time for another adventure somewhere else.